and welcome to today's live broadcast, which is coming to you from Szczecnica, Poland. And I'm going to be walking around because I like to get a bit of exercise to do the live broadcast. Also, it gives you people the opportunity to see a bit of the countryside in these wonderful autumn colors. But if there's any problem with the audio, please let me know. So I'm holding the microphone in my hand. Right, today's the 7th of October 2022, and today Vladimir Putin will be 70 years old. So for somebody who was 70, he's had quite a career. In fact, he's been the Tsar of Russia for the past 22 years, 1/3 of his life almost. So that's quite an achievement. Did I say Tsar? Yes, I did. I meant to say it as well. Although, and it needs to be pointed out, the role he has taken is not hereditary, and as far as I'm aware, neither of his daughters has shown any interest in doing the job. Right, so as this is a live broadcast, I would request that comments were kept civil and as always, please. Right, now, Vladimir Putin was born into what must be described as abject poverty. Now, you may have seen the video I did on his grandfather, who worked as a cook for some Kremlin bigwigs, and not only at the royal court, but also for communist leadership. It is said that he also, I'll use this one, he actually cooked for Rasputin amongst other people. Nonetheless, this didn't really help the family. Do it the other way around. And his parents of Putin, they lived in Petersburg, and they both went through the Second World War in awful circumstances. His father was left for dead on the bridgehead over the Neva River, which was kept at huge cost for quite a long time by the defenders of Leningrad. And his father was even left for dead, and it was only because somebody recognized the body and carried him back to Soviet lines across the Neva River, and that was what effectively saved his life. How did he get in this situation? It would say that Vladimir Putin's father and one of his comrades came across a German soldier. The German soldier was fractionally quicker in throwing the grenade, and that was what the German soldier then escaped. Putin's father, as it turned out, was only badly injured. The other person was killed. After this, his father ended up working in industry as he was not fit to carry out military duties. Now, his mother was in Leningrad during the siege, and she underwent starvation. She collapsed one day in the street, and she was left for dead. And it was only when they were collecting the corpses that maybe somehow the movement brought her back to consciousness, and thus her life was saved. So it's a pretty horrific war for both of his parents. Within his own family, there is one person who may even have been appears to have been shot by the communist authorities. Now, the fact that someone was shot, it doesn't mean to say they were shot for cowardice, because they could be shot for fulfilling orders which were then deemed the orders to have been incorrect. So this doesn't prove. This was the system, the Stalinist system, which placed no blame to the very top. That is to say, Stalin, but not only generals, but even privates could get the conscripts, could get the blame for the mistakes of the Soviet leadership. So that was a tough army to be in, to say the least. More about that in other videos. Now, when Putin was born, he would have had an older brother had he survived. So Putin was born in 1952, and by the time he came along, his parents had sort of given up on having any children, and he was mollycoddled to no small degree. Now, if you have a look at the street he was born in, you can actually see this on Google Maps, and you can see it's quite close to, it is in the center of today's Petersburg, and I think today the street would be quite a wealthy one. The irony is here, actually, I've walked down that street without even realizing it, and I looked amongst my videos to see if I could find something from it, but I couldn't. But anyway, today there's even a museum in his former home. So he lived in a thanks for listening. Thank you. So Putin, a strange thing here is that there was 3 families sharing one apartment. Now the building he lived in, like today, it's pretty expensive, I imagine, and it was pretty expensive before the revolution as well. So, but then again, a huge house probably just belonged to one family, and it was split up afterwards into small things. If you've seen the film Dr. Zhivago, which obviously is it's a novel, a film, and it's the film of the novel. But in that you get a pretty good idea of what the situation's like when the good doctor returns home and he's got all of these people living in his former home, and the former owners have been put into one room and they're supposed to manage in there. So this was being the sort of situation, and that existed at the time. So what I'll do is, once I've finished, I'll go through the questions and the comments. So sorry, it's sort of put me off a bit. Putin was the family was living in a flat, so it would have been divided off. Where there was a one gas ring in the corridor, and the toilet was communal. But one thing about Putin, and this does need to be said, is that whereas racism was very strong at the time, and not only that, and we see this in later life when he was in the KGB, which there was racism against certain ethnic minorities, Georgians amongst others, or Tatars, and Jews. But Putin actually lived with a Jewish family in one of the 3 families in there, and this appears to be one of the reasons, amongst all this other thing that he's done, whereas he undoubtedly is a racist, but he's not racist, he's not an anti-Semite. So that is one of the things that happened to him. Now, I said he was mollycoddled, but his father does seem to have given at least one beating, and that was for going outside of the courtyard. So you've got these blocks of flats around the courtyard where, for example, there could be a well. I don't know if it's a well in his case, but it often was the case. And so they lived around this, and that's what the kids would play. So I used to play in the streets in football, and so his mates would have been playing in the courtyard. And so there, one day, his mates decided to go out on a prowl around the streets in Leningrad, and his father found out about it, and give him a good hiding. And after that, he didn't do it again. But it needs to be I have done other things suggesting the links between Putin and Hitler, but so far it's not all that clear. One thing which is clear is only that both of them were mollycoddled, but in the case of Hitler, it was only by his mother, and Hitler didn't come from the poverty that Putin experienced. Now, Putin, however, was lucky enough to be able to go to university, and whilst he was there, he was able to get recruited into the KGB. Indeed, whilst at university, he took an interest in, there was a Soviet feature film, not feature film, it's like a series called The Sword and the Shield, which was all about the KGB. And as a result, this sort of encouraged him to go off to the KGB headquarters and ask if he could join up. So I do have actually a photograph somewhere of me standing outside the KGB headquarters. Then somebody, then it was FSB. One of the guards came out, took my camera. He made me sort of delete the photographs I'd taken, but there was one that survived of me knocking on the door. Anyway, so the thing was, Putin got in, whereas I didn't. And Putin was told when he went in there that you don't join the KGB, they ask you if you want to join up. Now, in the Soviet Union, when you went to get some work, what happened was you'd get allocated a job. So they would say to me, for example, right, Alan, you're good at languages, or appear to be, you can go and work in the, I don't know, in a hotel reception or something like that, where there's foreigners, something like that. So that it would more or less you'd get allocated. It doesn't matter what you're interested in. And I say, no, I want to be a pop star, but no, you can't be it. One, you've got to do that. So that's how it happened. And so he was at the university. They had the towards the end, he studied law, and he was allocated to a job in the KGB. Apparently, one of the people said to him, right, Mr. Putin, and somebody else stopped them and said, no, don't call Mr. Putin. His future has already been decided. And thus he ended up in the KGB. Now, the role of the KGB was to protect the communist state. And also, part of that role was to protect the countries it had occupied. As a result, Putin got himself a job a few years later into his career, which his career had been effectively looking at spying on opposition groups, and so he was sent off to East Germany. His role in East Germany would appear to have been to provide support to the Stasi, but the Stasi were more than happy or more than able to manage to do that for themselves. So he had to send reports. Where did he get the information for the reports from? Well, most of it appears to come out of local newspapers. However, he did have one idea, and that was to spy on certain American bases. And the three bases, I can't remember the three of them now. One that was in Fulda, the other, I've forgotten, never mind. And so anyway, so his idea was this. He would look in the Dresden and the area for families, or people had family there, and they'd say, well, we'll let you go to the west, but in exchange, we want you to send us information about American troop movements and in these areas. So, I mean, that was the deal. It wasn't very convincing. The Stasi didn't think much of it, and it was never actually put into operation. So, but one thing that turned up about 6 years ago was Putin's Stasi card. I think I've done a video on it, so you can have a look at it, which information largely came from the German press. So he, mind you, he did work his way up though in getting promoted as he went up. Now, he got married to Ludmilla, and Ludmilla was an air hostess flying between Königsberg, Kaliningrad, and Petersburg. So her little joke was that other girls turned up for dates on the tram, and she turned up for dates by plane. And so he seemed to have been quite cautious about his relationship with her. Doesn't seem to be very romantic about it. There was one thing that happened, was that Ludmilla one day before they got married became aware of somebody following her, and what happened was it was a young man, and he said, look, can we meet again? Can you give me a telephone number? She said, don't have a telephone number. And he said, well, take my number and then you can call me. And she refused it. Now, we don't know, it may have been somebody trying to pick her up, which fair enough is, we all try that from time to time. But it could have been Vladimir himself, or indeed it could have been the KGB. At this time, Ludmilla didn't know what he did. In fact, it seems, according to what she said, that she found out years later. Now, she did go off to Germany with him, and one thing she did then, a book appeared in German. I don't think this is even available in English, which the Confessions of Ludmilla, what she said, but she spoke of him as a wife beater, and he was quite draconian around the house. And I don't know if that's significant for anything. I think anything we talk about Putin is that we need to have a psychologist doing it, rather than somebody like me who might know about dates and places but is unable to provide the psychological and psychiatric analysis. So they had 2 daughters, and both of them are now married, and it would appear that he's a grandfather. One of them got married to somebody from the Netherlands, and they were living in the Netherlands. Last I heard, they'd gone back to Russia, but I don't even know if they're in Russia now. Putin's very secretive about his home life. He divorced Ludmilla. He got himself a much younger lady, and but not much really is known about their relationship. She was reported of being in Switzerland, but I don't know if that's true or if it isn't true. Now, the event of Putin's life, which has become the most reported, was that of the 9th of November 1989. And I have actually talked to people who were in Dresden on that day. So, he was at the KGB headquarters, and whilst the crowds were gathering outside. Now, there's all sorts of versions he's told, but he's one version he sort of went to the crowd with an AK-47 and warned them to go away. And in another version, he said this is Soviet property. Please don't do anything, and if you do, then we'll open fire. But whatever happened, the crowds in that night in Dresden, and I've spoken to a couple of people there, and they said to me it was something akin to a football match, and where people are quite boisterous and happy after their victory, but they weren't trying to hunt down the Stasi and the KGB and do to them what they had done to the German civilians. He did, however, ring up Moscow for instructions on what to do. But as he said later, Moscow wasn't answering. Now, after the fall of the communist system, Putin was recalled back to Russia. Now, the thing is that the whole thing just didn't collapse from one day to the other. It wasn't like Nazi Germany, whereas one day it was sort of Nazi Germany, next day it wasn't. It was a gradual transition. I was in Russia, for example, in 1992, and there were many things still left over from the communist system then. Indeed, I would argue that there's still plenty left over from the communist system today in Russia, and to a certain extent even in Ukraine. Putin went back. Now, they had saved up some foreign money, and the problem was, though, that the money was actually stolen from Ludmila's coat on the way back. He did manage to take with him a washing machine. The washing machine was 11 years old, but they managed to take that back with them. Now, Putin left the KGB. To a certain extent, it's understandable. He was a lieutenant colonel, which is quite a high rank, really, all given, and certainly it's shown himself to be nothing other than loyalty. Now, in Petersburg, now renamed, he became linked very strongly to the Mayor Sobchak, and whom eventually he became through contacts, a deputy mayor. And it's probably at this time that he got involved in criminal activities for the first time. Now, there were Russian journalists who investigated these things. Obviously now, as far as Russia's concerned, you won't find a great deal about it. These journalists have been shut up in one way or the other. So one thing he did, for example, was the transfer of food, and so with barter deals, something was sent to the West, and in exchange this food was sent to Petersburg. But what ended up happening is that the money ended up in Putin's private account. Now, this time, I can remember many stories about business deals going down. Thing was, in Russia, the secret services and anybody who had access to guns and a bit of a business mind were able to sort of take over control. So this is why you got these gangs being formed, a bit like, for example, in the Prohibition years in the United States. So that is why we've got this gangsterism which is taking over. Indeed, the state clearly didn't have much power at all. Now, with Putin himself, there is a very curious thing that happened, because Boris Berezovsky, who tried to set up some kind of a car dealership, and he went and offered Putin money to arrange it as the mayor, and Putin did it for him without taking any kickback. And Berezovsky said that this really surprised him about Putin. Whether or not Putin was looking for allies or not is not clear. Now, Sobchak, the mayor, lost an election to be mayor. He was replaced by somebody else. The person who replaced him had previously been an ally of Sobchak, but he turned on him. And Putin then felt he couldn't work for this new person. But one thing, it appears, that he couldn't accept was the fact that there could be elections and that his side could lose. And that's something that starts to repeat itself further on with in other events. Putin himself managed, through political contacts, to get a job with the KGB's successor, the FSB, and from absolutely nowhere, using the contacts he had within the Yeltsin circle, he became the head of the FSB, the security services. And in this role, maybe because he was so close to Yeltsin got through 4 prime ministers in the space of around a year, And the last one of all was Putin. Nobody's heard of him and knew who he was or anything. One thing we could say about Putin all the time was that he was very loyal to the person at the top. And he showed this loyalty in this way. Sobchak, who had been accused of embezzling funds and theft, he was put on trial. Sorry, he wasn't put on trial. He was arrested and he was being investigated. And he had a heart attack. And Putin, only Putin stood by him. When everybody else had deserted him, Putin stood by him and showed his loyalty. And this was one highly positive thing. Next thing he did was when there was investigations into the Yeltsin family about the massive amount of theft related to the refurbishment of the Kremlin in 1998, that Putin arranged for a compromise, or compromat, not compromise in English, what's the word? Compromat, what's that? He arranged for two prostitutes to be filmed who looked like the main investigator. It just had to look a little bit like the main investigator. It didn't. I personally don't think it was. And I wasn't there, and I haven't seen the person without his clothes on, but I have seen the video of it. So this way, the investigation into the Yeltsin family was stymied. And it's all of that together which made, for Yeltsin, I think, Putin as a suitable person to look after him. Now, you could see in Putin that he was going to keep the wealth that he had, as family, had accrued over the time that he was the Russian president. Now, Yeltsin clearly was physically not up to the job. He liked the odd drink now and again, and he was quite ill. He did live though until about 2008. But the very first thing that Putin did after being appointed president was to forgive the Yeltsin and his family of any crime. So he got an amnesty, and that did him well, because Yeltsin was never put on trial for the thefts that occurred under his rule. An important part of the family, so to speak, I use that word very loosely in Yeltsin's case, is that these people are those that became the I've forgotten the word. The power brokers around him, but oh, how embarrassing! I've forgotten. The business people around him, mainly business people who had gained control of large sections of the Russian economy through crime. Not all of them. I'm not suggesting that every single one is a criminal, but there certainly is a number who are. So Putin became the president. And at first it just, okay, fair enough, he seems all right. Because if you look at videos of him in 98, 99, or even the rather daft video he made of himself from the year 92, I think it was, when he was dead. I don't know the word, a sort of stopgap person, somebody who's better than nothing, maybe controlled by other people or something like that. But that isn't the way things turned out. And once he got a hold of the presidency and had the methods of the security services in his hands, what he did was to use it to further his own wealth. Now, there's a company called Heritage Capital, I think it's. The boss of it was Bill Browder, And sort of Bill had a rather similar background to me, in fact, although he made himself a fortune and I didn't. Bill ended up through owning the largest investment company in Russia. And he set up a small investment. He got clients in other countries that would buy parts of companies within the Russian economy, and then they would invest in them for him. But what he noticed was that these companies weren't very transparent. And this is where the problem is. Now, if you want to be quoted on a stock index somewhere, then you've got to have transparent accounts. This is utterly important. Thing is, if things are not transparent, as was the case in Russia, then investing is not a particularly good idea. So if you decide, for whatever reason, you're going to take, let's say, 5% interest in a company, and you're just a passive investor, like you might be if you have shares, for example, but if 50% of the company's profit is going amiss and dodgy deals are being done, for example, to buy things at much over their real rate, and in order to get a kickback from the supplier, then that is not a good thing. What Bill Browder did was that he actually reported this type of behavior, and guess what? He ended up getting arrested and kicked out of Russia, and his lawyer in the meantime was murdered by the security police, age 39, Sergei Magnitsky. This is indicative of the entire economy in Russia. Now, it wasn't Putin who invented this. This was the way it was working before, but it's Putin who's taken advantage of this. So the deal is the following. If you're a Russian, you don't complain, and if you don't complain, nothing will happen to you. Of course, providing, if you're a business person, that you cough up the cash when you're asked to. For example, I recently saw an interview with a person who was a real estate developer in Russia. He built a shopping center, and when he was asked to pay $50,000 a month as protection money to the police, then the obvious sort of thing happened. He refused. He got arrested. He goes to prison on trumped up charges, and he then had to flee the country once he was released. And this is something we see constantly, is this use against the business community. Now, the idea that you can have these organized crime people turning up and helping themselves to your cash, then it's not unusual. If you watch things about the 1930s in the United States, Lucky Luciano and all that type, you'd see all of them started off by threatening push barrow merchants on the markets, people selling fruit and vegetables, for example, and then they sort of progress up. So this is what it is in Russia today. Now, Putin, by around 2008, it's hard to say when because now we don't know, was the richest person in the world. Indeed, his own private wealth was equivalent to that of the entire debt of Africa, every country in Africa. And this money obviously is not in Russia. It's been sent to other countries, and one of the countries it's been sent to in no small amount is the United Kingdom. That is why the London laundromat exists as a place where Russians are putting their cash. Now, according to Bill Browder, Putin himself wants to take 50% of the takings. That does seem to me to be a rather steep amount, but who knows? If you can watch Alexei Navalny's film about the palace that Putin has built for himself in near Sochi. And you can see there the huge amount of money that has gone into it, and all thanks to the Russian taxpayer. So it is against Russians that Putin is really concerned. Now, as far as his foreign policy is concerned, there seems to be two things. It's now at the very beginning, he was a friend of the United States. Indeed, he was one of the first, if not the first, to offer assistance after 2001 terrorist attacks. George Bush said that he looked into his heart. Obviously, Putin came very well prepared. He was an intelligence person after all. And so he knew that Bush was in religion, and he told Bush the story in 1996 when Vladimir Putin, who had a dacha, a house out in the countryside, and there was a sauna in it, and the sauna had some electrical fault in it, and the entire house burned down. Putin rushed into the house, and he got out $500. That was all of his cash, and at the same time, he saved his baptismal cross. That was just the sort of thing that would appeal to Bush, and Bush repeated this story, showing what a good Christian he was, that the cross meant so much to him. Nonetheless, even apparently, now according to Lord George Roberts, the former head of NATO, I hope I got his name right there, Putin did ask him directly about Russia joining NATO, and he was told then, George said to him, well, what you've got to do is you've got to make an application. You've got to fill the application form in. And Putin replied, no, I'm not. We're a big country. Worse this effect. We don't do that sort of thing. You apply to us. And that was it. Now, NATO, despite what the Kremlin propaganda puts out, NATO does not recruit members. It's an exclusive club. You've got to apply the same way as that you have to apply for a job. That's the way it works. So, but Putin, I think, I don't know, but maybe this was one of the problems for Putin in his dealings with the West, that he wasn't invited to join the club. He was kept outside. Another thing is that we have to remember he's a child of the Soviet Union, and now when the Soviet Union broke up, without any doubt there were Russian minorities in many of the countries. Think of my own case. Friends of mine were people who left Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, trying to think of other places, probably other places, in the early 90s. And this was seen as the logical thing to do. If you look at the Russian-speaking population, for example, of Kazakhstan, or the ethnic Russian population of Kazakhstan, which fell from something like 40% to about 8%, something along those lines, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's really a huge amount of people who actually left. So, therefore, the idea for Putin was to, he had some imperial delusions. He wanted to build an imperial state, like Russia once had been, and so that is a major feature of his dictatorship. Certainly, whereas the 2000 elections were fair, I've got absolutely no doubt on that one. 2004, a little bit less fair, because by then Putin had started to get a hold of the means of mass production, so NTV, which was well known as a opposition news channel that was actually taken over using the same sort of excuses like tax and all the rest of it, that was put in the hands of one of Putin's mates. and so therefore now it just broadcasts the propaganda that he wants to actually hear. The first conflict, I would have to say, is that of Chechnya, which took place, the first Chechen War was in 95. The second Chechen War was largely provoked, I think, by Putin. He did this by arranging for terrorist attacks on apartment blocks, which killed something like 260 people in Russia, mainly in Moscow, but also in Ryazan. In Ryazan, the KGB people were actually, or KGB FSB I should say, were actually captured when planting explosives. And this was on the television. There were reporters who reported it. And thing was, obviously, as Putin had more and more power, this was dropped. And the fact that they were having a training exercise, as what they called it later, I mean, it's totally ridiculous. You don't have training exercises with live explosives in people's houses. So this was a clear attempt. So he used the murder of Russian people to actually to gain power. So that was the Chechen War, the second Chechen War, which was, I mean, the first one was bad, but in the second one, you've got these mass murders taking place. I've spoken to a couple of people who were there. There was a woman I was seeing some time ago whose her husband, sorry, she wasn't mine, she was me, as far as I'm aware, but her first husband, he ended up with this awful PTSD, which he described to me, and she described some of the places that he'd ended up being in. And we have the war with Georgia of 2008, which I won't go into, and the war with Ukraine, the first war in 2014, and the one which the continuation, or if you like, maybe there's only been one war against Ukraine that started in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, and then the Donbass and the Lugansk areas. But I won't go into that right now. I'm crossing the railway line now, so I'll be careful. So anyway, so there we have some of the crimes of Vladimir Putin, and I've been thinking of doing another video on this subject. I was in Russia the first time in 1993, and then some of the things I saw. And this is obviously Putin wasn't in power then, but in fact he was of Petersburg. But Putin at the time, Russia at the time, sorry, you could see these gangsters. I mean, they were almost as if they had a uniform. There was one thing I remember above all, BMW, which I'd seen on the British programme Top Gear as it was about to come out. So this 3 weeks earlier. Anyway, it was there in the street with the keys in and with everything down, with the windows down. And then these people, they were just showing off what they could do. It was, quite incredible. Thing is, I'd have to say as well, I mean, I'm sure mafia people everywhere are very pleasant and very polite, and when you could actually talk to them. And this is the strange thing. They weren't sort of having these, like you see in gangster films in the United States, where they've got these sort of dodgy Italian accents, or Bensonhurst, New York accents, or something like that. They were very elegant and eloquent. And so this is the society, and it's so bad for the Russian people. So anyway, so I don't want to sort of go on too long. Have a look at some of the questions. So I can't see the names because my eyesight isn't. Matt says, very interesting, thank you. Hello from Denmark. Apke says, they need to find better writers for those fake life stories. Hitler, poor, etc. makes one want to go to a homeless shelter and make some friends. A very influential group, those poor people. Well, yeah, no, I agree that, but Putin grew up from a poor background, and that cannot be denied. He wormed his way into the establishment elite before creating an establishment elite. But I mean, Hitler himself was, whereas he was quite wealthy, not wealthy, sorry, but he was doing all right. I've got a film of Hitler's father's house. You can have a look at it on this channel. You can see somebody who has a big house like that in a nice place like that, like he was living. It clearly didn't lack a few shekels. So anyway, but Putin was absolutely poor. Right. Oh, one of the daughters is dating a man called Zelensky. Oh, very good. Mind you, the printer, my printer was called Zelensky when I had a publishing business. So anyway, wonder what sort of a deal he made with Bush that he need to meet on Bush's ranch to discuss it. No, it was normal. I mean, Reagan took Gorbachev to his ranch. I think that's perfectly normal. And that's one good thing in the United States. Being actually the president can invite foreign leaders to his own private places. And so, I mean, if I became president of the United States, for example, I'd be inviting world leaders to my camper van. Right. So happy birthday, Putin, and hello from Milwaukee. His crimes are many and well documented now. Okay. Question. I'm very curious to know about how Putin managed to put himself in position of becoming president. There's a large jump from him being a KGB officer to head of power. Yes, there is. But the reason is because Putin was loyal. He showed loyalty to Sobchak, the corrupt mayor of Petersburg, who, incidentally, whose daughter Xenia is now in opposition to Putin. And he showed loyalty to Yeltsin by faking the faking the fact that the prosecutor had been with two prostitutes. I mean, you know, it seems a bit daft to me faking something like that in this day and age. But anyway, that was, well, 24 years ago. That obviously had something. I mean, if somebody had a film like that and said it was me, I said, what, 2? I wasn't with 2, I was with 4. Anyway, that's the way you should have done it. If Putin invites me, I'm not bloody going. Yeah, good idea. And Putin should retire. Putin should retire, but there's no chance of that now. And he's burning his bridges. And this is the thing about Putin. Whatever anybody else can say about him, I think Putin is extremely charismatic. And he's not the shy person, the non-entity that he appeared in the 1990s. He's got really is, in my opinion anyway, there's something about him which is a little, you can see the way he contacts with people, and he has a huge, and it's a friendly charisma. I'm hard put at to find a Western leader. Ronald Reagan had it. No, Ronald Reagan did have it, yeah. No, Ronald Reagan was really good. No, sorry. So but there's very, 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 very few. To a certain extent, Barack Obama as well. But I can't. I'm stuck to think of anybody else who had his sort of charm and charisma. And so that's one. He has this contact with people. Another thing which is really important to understand is this. Now, Putin puts himself out like as though he's some kind of Superman. So you see him in videos. He's scoring goals whilst playing ice hockey. Something he started in his late 50s. Which is quite an achievement. You see him like pumping iron in the gym, and you see him deep sea diving and cuddling tigers and this type of thing. I mean, can you imagine something like Boris Johnson doing something like that? And I mean, it's just ridiculous. or Biden, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just stupid. It's stupid to our way of thinking. But Mussolini did exactly the same thing. He appeared with running on the beach at Riccione, or Unbecoming. So Hitler certainly wouldn't have done it. Why did Mussolini do it, and why did Putin do it? It's first of all, it's to show that he is the strong man. He's the person in charge. And this appears to work. There was a song in Russia called A Man Like Putin. There's a girl band singing it. I want to find a man like Putin. And that was... That's what it's all about. So he's a real man, which is something actually, if any of you have ever been with any Russian women, or this word comes up quite often. They want to find a real man. Well, what are you interested in me for then? Anyway, sorry, that was just a little joke there. This is what Putin fulfills. The strange thing is that he is without doubt very popular. I suppose this is to a large extent due to the elites. But so you've got these people who live in the countryside in abject poverty, and as we have seen from the massive theft from already poor people in Ukraine, and then you've got this huge wealth which is really in your face as if you go somewhere. Thing is, in Russia, the access to Moscow for people to live has been largely denied. It's not that easy to go and live in Moscow. You need to get all sorts of permits and this type of thing. Obviously, they want to keep the riffraff out. You don't want to have these peasants, even if they do support Putin, coming in to the capital and messing it up. So that's how I sort of see it. Anyway. Sorry, I'm just going. And would I say that Trump is as charismatic as Putin? Yeah, that's a good question. I personally see no charisma in Trump, in the present day Trump. Certainly the Trump of the 80s and 90s, yeah, he had charisma. Personally, I just see nothing. But then again, Trump does have this following. It's very similar. It's similar to the way that Putin uses it, but it is different at the same time. Trump boasts about his wealth, whereas Putin doesn't. Trump probably doesn't have the wealth he claims, but Putin has many times over. Personally, to me, Trump is he's just rude. I mean, he's not a Reagan, and for that matter, he's not even a Bush. In my opinion, and now I'll get the comments there sort of saying I'm unsubscribing now and all the rest of it. Right, yeah, here's a good point from Apki, whom I know personally. About 30% of folks are paid to support someone, and the rest go along when they see a crowd set. This is how it's done, not by charisma. Yeah. Don't know. That's an interesting thought. Okay, if you don't think Putin's got charisma, write it down. I mean, he's a murderer. He's a mass murderer. I mean, he deserves to be. He should face the death penalty. I mean, there's not any doubt for what he's done and is doing right now. But assuming that the court found him guilty, of course. But I don't know. I think he's got charisma. Others might disagree. And Hugh says less mudari. I don't know what that means. This is a French word. Sorry. Okay, right, very good. So that's my homage to Putin on his birthday. You know, when I started this, I didn't know how long it would last. I thought I'd see it. I'll talk about it for about 10 minutes or something, and this has gone on for an hour. I mean, obviously, I have sort of followed his career over the last 20 years or so. Even earlier than that. I was thinking of putting some videos up on his earlier life, and I'd like, you know, when I do a video, I want to be in the place, so where it actually took place, or at least I've been there, and I want to have access to documents that may not be available in English, I'd put it that way. And then I think it's worth doing a video. So, you know, stuff I do related to the Second World War. So I've got the documents were in Polish, or they were in German or something. So that's how you know, it's finding stuff in Russian, which is a language I can't read, but finding stuff in Russian, which is now sort of original or what, is difficult. This is a problem. So I don't know what the solution is to that one. Okay, good. So I'm going to start going back. I tried changing my route several times, but because of the wind, I thought you mightn't hear me. And the thing is, I do like to go out for a walk when I'm doing things, and I do like to give you the opportunity to see, as I said at the beginning of this talk. It would have been better, you know, things are better when I've got notes in front of me. So if I do a video, what I do is I write it all down and I just speak it, and that way I don't make the mistakes like forgetting people's names and things of that nature, which can happen. And oligarch, that's the word I was looking for. You see, I forgot a word like oligarch when I was speaking earlier, and therefore, you know, this is one of the problems of doing things live. So anyway, good. So thanks very much, and all the best from me. This evening I have a video which is about a murder which took place towards the end of World War II. It was an SS massacre of German, well, not even deserters really, they were German soldiers. So that'll be tonight. It's only a short video though, it's a very quick one. So for the moment, from me in Szczecnica, and here, I'll show you the power station. You can see the power station, no you can't, there it is. I'll turn the thing around, you can see the power station. There's the power station in Szczecnica. And so, all the best from me here. Thanks very much for listening. And also another comment. As Dr. Felton notes, you can't get facts out of Moscow in World War II. So it's going to be hard work diving in piece by piece. Yeah, you can't. Mind you, I would say one thing. I did a video on Hitler, the place he was, his ashes were destroyed in 1970, which I think is my best researched video, and that was largely thanks to information from Moscow. So it is possible. Okay, thanks for being here with me today, and all the best from me in Poland, and thanks for listening. So an hour's talk, sorry, and bye for now. Thank you.